For me, we look at the problem of the dollar, and indeed of many other problems facing the United States, as falling under the heading of the very kinds of problems that you would expect in a declining empire. That is, in a global empire past its peak and now in the very unhappy position of having to face relentlessly that it doesn't have the power and it doesn't have the wealth it once had. And so it needs, first of all, to face the basic problem, which we do not do here in the United States at all. I mean, if you remember last November, we had a presidential election in which three candidates, Biden, Harris, and Trump, never uttered one word about a declining empire or a declining U.S. capitalism declining because its empire is gone. The very same people who could and did look at Great Britain and say the sad condition of that society and of that economy has more than a little to do with the disappearance of the British Empire. They can say that, they can show that, but they cannot allow even the question to be applied to the United States, as if in some bizarre way, never specified, all other empires that are gone mean nothing because the American empire endures in some magical way. So you mentioned Bretton Woods, right? The dollar becomes the world currency after the British pound and any other aspiring currency had been destroyed by World War II and couldn't possibly play that role. John Maynard Keynes had hoped to preserve that role for the British pound. But the American counterpart, Harry Dexter White, made it very clear to Mr. Keynes that that was not going to happen. And it didn't. The dollar became the world currency. The United States was producing half the traded goods in the world economy. The United States had the nuclear weapons. The United States, I can fill in. You all know that history. The dominant position of the United States was wrapped up in the role of the dollar. It quickly became not just the currency in which world trade was evaluated and conducted. It became a reserve alongside of gold to support the currencies of other countries by being held in that form as a dollar in the central bank portfolios of that time, or U.S. treasuries, which is the equivalent. So in that situation, everyone who thought about it would have known that this empire cannot last because of the bizarre situation that other countries that would be contesting would be coming back from wartime destruction, because you can do that relatively quickly, as both Germany and Japan showed us in the years afterwards. So it should have been understood that the dollar cannot play that role. Well, the irony is that this already happened by the 1960s. De Gaulle brought the gold back, didn't want to leave it here, and then the United States went off the gold standard in order to basically force the rest of the world to deal with the dollar. And that gave the dollar 2 or 3 more decades. But by the end of the century, the process of decline had never stopped. The American capitalists participated and accelerated the decline when they made the decision about the same time that the U.S. went off the gold standard to move production to Asia. But in any case, out of the United States. The development of the jet engine and the development of the internet made it possible to supervise production as easily in China as before you did it in California, or as easily in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as before you did it in Chicago. And so the wages being much lower there, those economies being desperate to bring jobs to their country, the American corporations saw enormous profit and moved out hundreds of billions of dollars of investment abroad, crucial to the development of the Brazilian economy, the Indian economy, the Chinese economy. So the United States, which, by the way, sometimes likes to take credit for the economic development of China, and it deserves some credit, to take it away from the Chinese is childish, but that's what passes for politics in our country. But there's a grain of truth. It's partly what American corporations and European corporations and Japanese corporations did. But the end result is all of that development outside of the United States would sooner or later mean that the United States dollar wasn't necessary. And then big countries like China and India and Brazil began to learn from their own economists the privileges and the benefits you get if your currency is used around the world. And they wanted some of that for themselves, which again is what I mean by a declining empire facing demands that are natural as other economies grow. And one last thing. We might have not been talking about this now. It might have gone on for another 2 or 3 decades. But there were 2 things that bring it to a head now and that suggest to me it's not going away. And there's nothing Mr. Trump basically can do about this. The first is that the Chinese and the Indians are catching up, found a way to achieve much faster economic growth than the United States, which meant that the Chinese catching up, which could have and should have in many ways taken longer, has been compressed into a much shorter historical period. And the Chinese are literally discovering each day what their enormous industrial situation permits them to do. And that accelerates the decline of the dollar beyond what I think it might otherwise have been. The rapid economic growth and the inability of the United States, at least so far, to copy that, being held back by the ideology of the primacy of the private sector and the quote-unquote inefficiency of the government, limiting the role of the government, and doing this even though it's contradicted by other things that Trump is doing, he is a Republican. He is part of that tradition. And that tradition precludes the United States from copying China. They make a virtue out of it. We won't go in that authoritarian direction. But again, that's childish. They're not going to catch up to China if they don't, and they will be falling further behind, including the dollar, unless they do. And there is no escape from that situation. And finally, the other thing that made it go faster is this war in Ukraine, which, couldn't have been foreseen. But that war has produced a rapid acceleration in the whole BRICS phenomena. And one of the ideas of BRICS has always been to not necessarily do away with the global role of the dollar. That's really not relevant. The dollar will be important as long as the United States is as big a player in the world economy as it still is. But it will diminish. That's for sure. And the BRICS, with the consequence of what's happening, and I say that even before dealing with tariff increase on India by Mr. Trump, but you could see all of this coming. This only makes the decline of the dollar happen even faster. And I think you can therefore see Mr. Trump promised to protect the dollar, and the dollar has really gone down sharply, literally, from the day he was inaugurated on the 20th of January to my speaking with you right now. It's down, depending on which currency you compare it to, but it's down 8 to 12%, and that in a short half-year period is a very serious comment on the wisdom of him protecting the dollar. That's not happening. Everyone now knows that the best quality electric vehicle at the lowest prices is produced in China. And as a group, they have outcompeted their counterparts in Europe, the United States, Japan, anywhere. And yet here in the United States, we currently have a 100% tariff. It was 25% in Trump's first presidency. Then Mr. Biden by the way, on the same strategy of supporting our automobile industry here and bringing manufacturing back to the United States, raised it to 100%. And Mr. Trump has left it at 100%, even as he negotiates with China about other tariffs. All right, the result is that in Europe, you can see BYD automobiles all over the roads. In the United States, I've never seen one. Okay, let me explain why this looks good, because it says to the American people, as Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden both did, we're going to protect auto workers. An interesting idea. You're going to protect auto workers because you make it impossible for American businesses who purchase electric cars and trucks, because that's the future of the world. They have to buy inferior vehicles at a higher price than their competitors around the world. Now, I'm an economist, and I know what I just said amounts to a competitive disadvantage for American employers relative to their foreign competitors, because the foreign competitors are buying BYD cars and trucks. So yes, you are saving jobs for General Motors and Ford and Toyota here in the United States because they don't face the Chinese competition. But are you protecting American manufacturing in general? Not at all. I would argue you are destroying it. And the longer this continues, the more and more the rest of the world will make do without trading with the United States. It's not reliable as a place to export to. That's the tariff problem. And it's not reliable as a place to do business if you would need to import anything because of the tariffs. And inside the United States, you are creating a globally uncompetitive economy. Now, that'll take years to play itself out, but I don't see anything contradicting that. The advantage the United States had in high technology, that has now been compromised by the Chinese demonstrating they can do pretty much what we can do. The Huawei Corporation itself has demonstrated that. From the time that the United States arranged for the arrest of the CEO's daughter in Canada to the present, when the Huawei is out competing American, you're looking at. And the results? Look at Apple. Apple, to escape the problem of being in China, moved to India, which is now turning out to be as big or maybe bigger problem for Apple than China was. But therein lies a lesson. Everyone is learning by looking at Apple. If Mr. Trump's goal was to move production from the rest of the world to the United States, the herky-jerky up and down, temporary delay, these are all reasons not to be productive inside the United States, because you have no idea what the conditions are into which you would do what? Spend the money, spend the time to move production from overseas into the United States under these circumstances? And I'm not even talking about a society splitting apart in which half of the country sees Mr. Trump and his program as a kind of fascism. And I don't think you're going to see Mr. Trump even talking about moving production here, because even the few examples he's able to point to are very flaky. They have big numbers, but it's over a 10-year period. Mr. Trump will be gone as president long before that, and so will all the people making these promises. They mean nothing. They are theatric to help Mr. Trump play the game because he can't do the reality.